Record for the 3 people who are recording. Hi, so I'm Sandra Taylor, the EFT Trainer and Coordinator of BEFT, the British EFT Centre, and a member of the DMT, its decision-making team. And we're providing these theory, practice and reading sessions to our members and to all of those who've been affected by our training because of COVID-19. And then, as usual, we will be uploading the video and putting it on YouTube as well for everybody else to see. So today we're looking at pursuer withdrawer, and this was stimulated by Camilla, who had the question of differentiating between the pursuer and the withdrawer. And on the face of it, of course, that's just dead simple, isn't it? But underneath that, it's not so simple. So before we fully start, if you could take your video off, because for those people who've got not so good internet, it helps if the videos aren't on. And if you mute as well, that would be great. And then you can maybe come in again as we have time to kind of talk, and we can also do things through chat as well. Okay. Okay. So I got the theory group of the 3 of us, and I love theory. I'm with Sue Johnson. There's nothing as practical as a good theory. And for pursuer withdrawer, I have really gone wide to try and find things that are not just the straightforward bits. The bits that are there, but you have to look across the literature to find it. And the bits that while they're there, maybe we haven't attended to them so much, so we haven't sort of really seen them and understood them. So I've looked at the books, I've looked at a range of articles, but I've also gone broader. One of the quotes on one of the slides is from Catherine Ream from the EFT that she does with Jennifer Alden. I've also gone to, if you're a member of ICEFT, you've got access to all the community newsletters. And in here, there are some really important pieces from 3 articles, which are nowhere else. The content in them is nowhere else. And that's one of the amazing things about those newsletter articles, is they're so good at getting into precise ways of working and seeing things. So if you are a member of ICEFT, you might want to really go to those newsletters and have a look at them. And then I've also included a handout from an EFT summit in 2010 to do with blamer softening. That again, that piece of work expanded some work that's in earlier articles, but was never itself published, though Laurie Brubaker does talk about it a little bit. So sometimes you just have to go wide if what you want is to get a really good overview of something. Yeah, so this was one of those occasions, and I have to say I've become a bit obsessed by the pursuer withdrawer bit, and well, it was a great relief to finish all my slides and to get the concept of the session sorted, because it was pretty overwhelming sort of looking across all of that. So I'm hoping that you will really get something from it, that you'll get a few nuggets that will really help you reflect on your client work, on you with your client work. So just bear in mind as we're going along, you and the pursuer withdrawer positions, the clients that you're working with, see if things come up as you go that really kind of just take you a little bit further in your understanding. Okay, so I am going to share the screen. Okay, and where are we? There we go. I'm going to show the video panel, and I am going to go from the beginning. Okay, and we're going to make that smaller. And that's it. Okay, right. So We're going to do this in 2 pieces. They may just flow really smoothly on from one another because basically I use up all the time to talk through the slides, or it may be that halfway through we have time to do a little bit of talking, and I'm hoping for that. So, pursuer, withdrawer. What we know about them is that they are interactional positions. Yeah, so they're about how we behave with each other. And they arise when we're coping with relationship difficulties. Yeah, so they're not there all the time. So most of you, if not all of you, will be familiar with the withdrawer coping by turning off the emotional heat, numbing, zoning out, just kind of absorbing it, sucking it up, hiding, turn away, withdraw, stonewall, and sometimes becoming quite angry and dismissive. And the pursuers, their way of coping is the reverse, really. It's turning up the emotional heat, pushing, pulling, poking, worrying, threatening, nagging, demanding, catastrophizing. Yeah, very much associated with high anxiety. So nothing new there, I would imagine. So let's just have a little check. I think you will all have got the slides beforehand, and I don't know if you had a look at this, which one is which. Okay, so we are roommates. We never seem to be close anymore. That is the call of the pursuer. Yeah, we're not close. Okay, I get mad, sure I do. She just doesn't seem to care. I'm just trying to get a response from her, any response. Okay, so anybody know who that is? You can just say it because I haven't got the chat on at the moment. Just make yourself unmute and tell me.
Pursuer?
Pursuer.
Absolutely. Okay, that's the pursuer. I'm trying to get a response. Okay? I feel numb. I don't know how to feel, so I just freeze up and I space out.
Withdrawer.
Withdrawer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, withdrawer.
Yeah. I'm just not sure I matter to him. It's like he doesn't see me. I don't know how to reach him.
Pursuer.
Beautiful. You're on it.
Pursuer.
Yeah. I can never get it right with him, so I just give up. It all seems hopeless.
Withdrawer. Withdrawer.
Yeah. It's the withdrawer who feels I can never give up and never get it right, so I give up. That's the withdrawer bit. I give up. It's hopeless. Yeah. I get that I'm flawed somehow. I'm a failure as a partner. Somehow that just paralyzes me.
Withdrawer. Withdrawer.
Exactly. You've got the paralysis in there, haven't you? Which is the freezing of the withdrawer. So you're very good when it's quite clear like that. Yeah. Brilliant. But one of the questions I thought is there's so much in the books and the articles about pursuer and withdrawer. But one of the things that it felt like wasn't really answered was, why are we really bothered? You know, why is there such a lot about pursuer withdrawer? And basically, the more that we understand the patterns our couples are getting into and why they're doing it, the more we can attune to them. And the more we can attune to them, the more we can help them change their distress pattern. So when we understand that, we can also get beyond the behaviors and beyond the content that we can also get stuck in a lot. And we can get underneath to the motivation, the fear, and the longing. When we get down there, we can also really validate and normalize. Yeah, we can start to enable them to hear each other and themselves. And then that helps us transform this relationship. Yeah, so it really gets us away from what's happening on the surface level. And Catherine Ream, in one of the EFT Cafe videos, says, above all, we want to attune with our clients. We want our clients to feel safe with us coming closer to their distress, not necessarily physically closer, But just asking about their inner world is us focusing in on it and our focusing coming closer. So when we really get them, it becomes safe enough for them to let us closer and closer into areas that are more and more vulnerable for them. So then it also got me thinking, well, isn't it just a bit simple or even simplistic to consider, pursue, withdraw? But actually, if you look at the research and everything, we do have, in our own unique ways, only two ways of protecting ourselves and trying to keep hold of connections with our partners when it feels unsafe. Okay, we either turn away, yeah, we kind of numb, we shut down, and we deny our needs. Yeah, that's one way to protect ourselves. I don't have any needs. And the other is to step forward. Yeah, so we hear our anxiety, we fight in our response. Yeah, so in a sense, of course, it's simple. There is move away and there is move back. And those two are associated with the withdrawer and the pursuer positions. And what we want is for it, sorry, wrong way around. And I love this quote from Sue Johnson in Hold Me Tight. For all of us, the person we love most in the world, the one who can send us soaring joyfully into space, is also the person who can send us crashing back to earth. All it takes is a slight turning away of a head or a flip, careless remark. There is no closeness without this sensitivity. If our connection with our mate is safe and strong, we can deal with these moments of sensitivity, and indeed we can use them to bring our partner even closer. But when we don't feel safe and connected, it's those moments that are like a spark in a tinder forest. They set fire to the whole relationship. Yeah, this is the real power of the relationships we have, and the danger when they're not safe and secure. So what we know is that there are real striking parallels between infant parent attachment and adult attachment. And if you want to go and have a look at that in more detail, it's Sue Johnson and Ed Tronick's video. It's called Love Sense, From Infant to Adult. It's on YouTube and you've got the link there. And what they do is they show the still face experiment that Ed Tronick did, that many of you will be familiar with, and then an adult kind of version as well. And they show the same predictable sequence that Bowlby put forward. Yeah, that there's a reach. And if there's no response to the reach, there's a protest and a push. Yeah, we can link that to the pursuer. If that is not at all responded to, there is a turn away and a shutdown, and we can associate that more with the withdrawer. Then there's an emotional meltdown, there's distress, and there's upset. I'm remembering the picture of the baby in that still face experiment all the way through that. And in a healthy relationship, what you have is a reconnection. So we have 4 attachment styles as adults. Okay, so we have secure. Okay, when you're securely attached, you are more open generally to new information. You can revise your beliefs, you can seek reassurance. There's more fluidity, there's more confidence with self and other. People who are more anxiously attached, then they feel a lot of anxiety when there's distress in the relationship. And here Sue Johnson saying that adults can experience separation from their attachment figure as a catastrophe that parallels death. You know, the intensity of the feeling. And people can have more of an avoidance style when they actually avoid seeking or giving support when these attachment needs arise. And then we have fearfully avoidant adults, which mixes the anxious and avoidant. And here we have connection being longed for, but when it's offered, it feels like a threat. So, for example, in childhood attachment strategy of the fearful avoidant or disorganized, what we have is a child who perhaps in an abusive relationship where the source of love and care is also the source of danger and fear. So that's a particular challenge in our work when people move between those two positions. And basically those attachment strategies are responses to the question of, are you there for me? Yeah, when a relationship becomes stressed, are you there for me? Those attachment styles are interpersonal. They're not just labels for personality traits, though some people are like that a lot in their relationships generally. Others, it will only come out when the relationship is in distress. They aren't absolute, yeah? So we can be insecure in one relationship, we can be anxious or avoidant, and we can be secure in another. Yeah, so if you think about your relationships, some of them you will get more anxious, some of them you'll withdraw from more, some it will seem quite chaotic and you might kind of flip about, and others you might feel a lot of the time just really secure and clear. We may have a kind of dominant way of behaving in a relationship, and that may be more pursuing, withdrawing, more avoidant, or anxious, but they can be modified by new relationships. It used to be thought that they were pretty much fixed for life, but they're not. You can earn security in your relationship. You can earn it as a youngster, you can earn it as an adult, but also the relationship itself will promote certain ways of being. Yeah. And because it's not a fixed thing, you'll notice that people talk about it in different ways. So some people will say attachment style, which kind of sounds quite fixed. So other people talk about it as an attachment strategy, you know, as a kind of a way that somebody deals with a certain thing. And that gives it a bit more fluidity in your understanding of it. And then still others talk about it as habitual forms of engagement, that it is about an interpersonal way of engaging that has some flexibility to it. So they do change also as relationships change, which is lucky really, because, you know, otherwise there wouldn't be much point doing EFT, would there, if we didn't feel as if this could actually change. Yeah. And one of another video that you might want to go to on YouTube to remind yourself of this is Soothing the Threatened Brain. So this is follow-up from Cohen's work, where he put people in fMRI scanners to and gave them a kind of threat of you will get a shock, and had them holding different people's hands. And so Sue Johnson and Cohen and some colleagues got together and did some research on about 30 couples where they had EFT, and the woman had the fMRI with the shocks before and after therapy. And what they found was what we would hope for, is that when they entered, before they had therapy, when they were holding the hand of the partner in a distressed relationship, it was not safe. The little alarms went off in different parts of the brain, just as it did when holding the hands of a stranger or being on their own. But after therapy, what happened was that the lights went off in a different way, or even didn't go on at all. What they found was that the partner had become safe. Yeah. So it wasn't that they dealt then with the anxiety about potentially having a little shock, that it soothed it. What they actually found was it didn't trigger in the first place, that the safety was already there. And this is what you find with secure attachment, is that it's not that the fear and anxiety is calmed, it's that they're less likely to feel fear and anxiety in the first place. Yeah, that secure people kind of look around and just don't see it as dangerous as people who are more anxious, for example. So people can earn secure attachment, and they can earn it through EFT, which I think is obviously totally fabulous that we can actually prove this kind of thing. So an example here of moving from rigidity to flexibility and vulnerability is this shift from "you're impossible to get close to," followed by "you are too angry, I don't want to get close to you," becoming "I need you to hold me, and I want to comfort you. I feel so good when you turn to me." Yeah, and many of us will know that shift that we experience over time with our clients, and just how wonderful it is when they move from the first position to the second. Yeah, it's just so lovely. So then another thing that I was thinking about is, isn't it all rather negative? Yeah. When we look at the words that people use, I mean, these are just some of the words that people use for the withdrawer. That they're stonewalling, they're distancing, they're defending, they're avoiding, they've got feelings, they're cold. The pursuer, they're just being reactive, they're blaming, they're demanding, they're criticizing, pursuing, they're just angry. Yeah, and you will know all sorts of idiosyncratic kind of and common things that each of the partners will kind of throw at each other around the withdrawing and pursuing positions. And essentially they're negative because they're about pain. Yeah, they're about the person protesting about how the other one is being towards them, when what you actually want is closeness and connection. So we will find that the words are, in essence, quite negative. And if you look at the literature, the very early literature had the pursuer called more the blamer. So we will often talk about the blamer softening event, because the research that was done to create a mini theory was, at that point, the term was commonly used, blamer. So we will talk about the blamer softening event. But over the years, what has tended to happen is that the term has become more pursuer, that the person is pursuing for connection. Yeah. So we see that within the EFT literature itself, making some shift with that. But what stops us really kind of getting lost in that negativity is the attachment lens. Yeah, that EFT is an attachment-based therapy, and it saves us. It really helps us kind of just move away from all of that negativity that they're kind of aiming at each other. And here, for the next few slides, I'm looking at an ICEFT newsletter, community newsletter article, where Matt Angelstorff has an article on the evolution of interactional positions, so how they actually evolve. So what we have is that our previous experiences in attachment relationships, they lead to us developing common strategies for meeting our attachment needs. Yeah, so our past influences, our current behavior. But also it's impacted by other relationships that we've learned things from, and the cultural messages around us as to what's okay and what's not okay. And some of those will get in the way of us being able to honestly share with our partners what we really need and long for in an attachment way. So we will tend to show our love in the way that we have developed. Yeah. So the soon-to-be withdrawer will tend towards pleasing, placating, and fixing, so that they don't let their partner down. And the soon-to-be pursuer will attend to their partner's emotional needs, and they will want reassurance that they're loved, to keep that relationship as a significant focus of attention. And over time, the pursuer may feel disconnected and a bit deprived emotionally. perhaps voice that in an unclear way, the withdrawer will hear that and feel helpless or feel as if they're getting it wrong. And then that will start to shut them down. And then the negative cycle will start to kind of kick in. But also, as alongside that, we need to take into account how secure they are generally, and that they have a relationship-specific model of attachment. Yeah, so this is also about how this person responds to this partner and how the response comes back. Yeah, it's not something that is kind of set apart from the uniqueness of this relationship and how each interacts with each other. It will also depend on the current relationship events. So, you can have people who are generally very secure and very secure in relationships, but they have terrible events that happen that start to kind of corrode how they are with each other and make them turn away from each other more than for each other. Like, if you're super, super tested, then we all will crumble at some point, however secure we were. Yeah, so you will sometimes get secure couples coming in. The work may well be quicker than some of the others, but they may well be there because all of us have a point at which we really struggle. And then in relationships where they're not embedded in a negative cycle already, where the behaviors become really rigid, if there's more flexibility around it, then what you'll see is different partners pursuing at different times, and that will be around particular themes. So if a theme is really important to one partner, today, they will be the ones who kind of pursue to explore that and to get it sorted. Whereas it might be that another day it's a different theme, and the other partner, that's crucial for them, and they will go for that. So it's important to know the sort of fluidity and flexibility, and yet also how it ends up often in our therapy room quite rigid. Oh, gone the wrong way. So the knowledge of how the interactional positions of pursuer and withdrawer evolve really helps us. And it helps us convey to the couple that what they're getting up to now is only the end point of a really painful process where they have tried so hard to maintain their relationship. And what they've tried just hasn't worked, and they've just tried and tried. Yeah, so it really helps us validate the accusing and avoidant behaviors that they've got up to as their best attempts to have a good relationship. Yeah, and when you do that, what you're doing as well is you're putting them in the same team. Yeah, this might look really different. You might do this in completely different ways. But hey, what both of you have been doing along the way is you've been doing your best to have a good relationship, your best to get it back to a good relationship. Yeah, it's just that it hasn't worked, and you've tried harder and harder and got more and more embedded in it not working. Yeah, that starts to give you a team. That starts to head you towards step 4, where they're a team against the negative cycle. You can be hinting at that from very early on in the therapy. So it's that attachment lens that takes us from all that negativity. It gives us a no-fault definition of relationship distress and repair. Yeah, that how they each behave are reactions to a perceived threat to the relational bond. Yeah. And what we can forget is that the distress, the vulnerability of people in the pursuing and the withdrawing position, the vulnerability isn't just hidden from the other person, it's hidden from the self. Yeah, so the withdrawer blocks their emotions, their sense of what's going on in their body, their needs, their longings, and they don't kind of touch into them. And the pursuer may look like they're more in touch with them in their demands and everything. But actually, as you know, when you get to stage 2, when you're kind of asking them to be more vulnerable and open, actually a lot of that attack and saying what you need from the other one and what they're not giving you also actually defends you from the vulnerable self of really kind of knowing and getting in touch with the vulnerable needs. Oh, somebody's got a very noisy mic. Yeah. Okay. So it's hidden from both of them. And the other thing that's hidden is the power of each position. Okay, it might help if you're not mute to mute yourself now, because I'm not sure who's got all that noise. Okay, so each position also has a lot of power to it, which the person in that position doesn't usually get. Yeah. So the pursuing partner will often just not understand how painful it is for the withdrawing spouse, particularly because they feel as if they're not making any impact. So, you know, if I'm not getting a response, it must be because it's not going anywhere. And, you know, to actually get that it is incredibly painful, it's not that nothing's happening in the withdrawer, is a really important thing. And it's a really important thing for the pursuer to understand in their being, not just in their head. And in terms of withdrawal, it's like the withdrawer often does not have any idea of how distressing that is. They just think, well, I'll just close down and then it'll be all right. Yeah, it'll all be calm and it'll be kind of fine. We can just kind of forget it and kind of leave it. But what it does in terms of attachment is the person is become inaccessible and unresponsive, and it threatens the other person's attachment security. Yeah, and it says here, the lack of emotional responsiveness shatters assumptions of secure connection and induces overwhelming separation distress. Yeah, so you can see why the pursuer is provoked into pursuing further when there's that just totally panicked, unresponsive attachment figure. So again, the withdrawer has to get hold of the pain, the panic that is caused by them withdrawing, and that they actually do matter, because they often feel as if they're invisible and they just don't matter anymore. So that's really crucial. And what happens is that partners usually feel a real relief when you've got the hold of all of that and you've been able to kind of normalize it and explain it. What it does is they get it. Yeah, it makes sense of what they end up doing, which they don't enjoy doing, the pattern that they've got into, how the other one's responding to them, and they can start to feel some power in the process. Yeah. So if I created this, then maybe I can make it different. Yeah, really crucial. And also because you're putting it in on a no blame, that helps enormously. It helps people feel much safer. So now let's start looking at the cycle. And here, obviously, what we're mostly looking at is the negative cycle. Yeah. So both people are creators and victims of the cycle. And, you know, one's position evokes the position of the other. So it really is an infinity loop of each impacting the other along the way. And people are really different in how aware they are of it, the speed of it, how automatic it is, how rigid it is, how they exit it, how they reconnect. Yeah, but often by the time people come into therapy, it's quite rigid and in a spin. And basically what's happened is that people have become emotionally starved from each other. And it's this that is the danger. So Gottman's study and other studies have shown that it's not the fighting, for example, that is the thing that will lead to divorce. It's the lack of emotional intimacy. They're not turning to each other. Yeah, they're not being there for each other. So what happens is that your partner gradually becomes an enemy. Yeah, trust dies, and there's a lot of grief and a lot of anger. And what we do is we talk about an alarm being constantly on and the noise blocking out other cues. Yeah, when that cycle is really in action, what you know as an EFT therapist is the partner cannot hear. Yeah, that's why we do lots of things like slowing down, for example, reframing, validating, to just open up their ability to be calmer and to be able to hear themselves and each other. And what we have is, you know, these cycles, on the one hand, they are so predictable. We know, you know, the pursuer withdrawer cycle, for example, we know the kind of things that happen underneath it, but it's also unique to every couple. Yeah, they'll do certain parts of that in their own idiosyncratic way, and it has to be a discovery for them. We can be, you know, inclined to teach them. We can be inclined to, we've seen it 1,000 times before, you know, that we kind of put stuff in there, but what we have to do is support them to actually discover elements of this themselves, so that it is an experiential process and not a head process. Yeah, lots of you will know about the most common cycles. We have the pursue withdraw. That is the predominant cycle, and that's why, you know, a lot of what you read will just be talking about that. And indeed, some of what I've been talking about is kind of assumed a pursue withdraw cycle. But what we also have is a withdraw cycle, where both of them are withdrawing from the relationship and feeling unsafe. It might be that one of them was previously a pursuer and has become burnt out, and you cannot tell. You know I worked with a couple for nearly a year who were a withdraw couple before it became really apparent which one had been a pursuer before and was starting to kind of wake up, if you like, and be able to kind of risk bringing themselves in more. You also have the attack cycle. That one usually doesn't sustain itself for a long time. It's a very hard one to do. It usually is a period of attack and then moves into pursue withdraw. Then you have a reactive cycle. So this is where the pursuer has become burnt out and then is basically saying, come on, you know, I'm giving up unless you come forward. And the withdrawer then becomes a reactive pursuer. Yeah, because they're getting really panicky and scared, and they're trying to kind of fight for the relationships that they'll pursue. And then you have complex cycles where one or both of them has a fearful avoidant strategy where, you know, it's like come forward, and then when partner comes forward, they're in a panic and they withdraw. So it flips around an awful lot. And these cycles, you know, just a reminder again, they're not happening all the time. They're a default position as the relationship has gone on, when there's a threat or a real vulnerability in the relationship. So an example of one of the things that we're always telling people to do is to reflect the cycle, go back to the cycle. Yeah, so here's one of the examples of, for example, in a session 1 of reflecting a pursuer withdraw a negative cycle. So let's see if I understand. Okay, so what usually happens here is that you want more closeness with Walt and you try to talk to him about your feelings and the relationship. And Walt, you prefer to be doing activities or to be with lots of friends. So it's really hard to make time for this, and you're not sure you even know what she means by talking. Yeah. And this has got to the point where Jane, you see Walt as a roommate rather than a partner. And then you get really kind of angry and critical. And then Walt, you try to avoid that anger. So you go out even more and you're spending less and less time with Jane. Is that it? So you can see that this happens and this happens and this happens. And throughout all of that, there is a no blame. There is a explaining. There is a kind of understanding of what is going on and what they actually kind of want. But underneath those positions, you know, just as they didn't know the power of their own position, they will often be surprised that their partner doesn't know what's happening underneath those positions. So the withdrawer will feel this sense of rejection, failure, and inadequacy, which will kind of tend to freeze them a bit in the relationship, freeze them from being active. And the pursuer is more likely to feel lonely and abandoned and not mattering. Yeah. And each will assume that the other one has got some idea about that when they really don't. So to get underneath the cycle and each position, what we do is we unpack emotion. And you'll be maybe fairly familiar with this. It's referred to a lot of the time. And Laurie Brubaker's book, Stepping into Emotionally Focused Couples Therapy, has got a lovely section all around that, and I would recommend it. There are 5 elements that we can unpack in emotion. And we can often go to any of those places with the pursuer because it's all in action. Yeah, and the thing will be to kind of slow it down and get them to kind of stay and focus with one of them. One of the things that Laurie says is that at times it's with the withdrawer, it might be that it's only the action tendency part that the withdrawer is aware of, that they've actually kind of disconnected from so much else that it's just what they do. So with the withdrawer, how you might work differently from the pursuer is that you might pay more attention quite quickly to the action tendency, what they actually do. Yeah, I freeze and I go off in my head, or I literally go off and I go to the shed, or I go for a walk, or I do whatever. And you have to actually just very slowly work backwards from that. You might not have the flexibility to go in initially in any of the other pieces. So when we're actually differentiating between the two of them, we often just rely on, like with those 6 examples I did at the beginning, we look at, withdrawers distance, shut down and placate, pursuers demand, criticize and blame. Which one's doing which? Oh yeah, we've got that sussed. But it's not always that simple. And, another question is, if it's not simple, why bother? Why is it that we get so het up about it? Well, it's because it's not an academic exercise. It is a therapeutic task to work out what's going on for them. And when it is more complicated, our reward is going to be an enriched understanding of this couple. And therefore, our ability to attune and work well with each of them in their relationship will be enhanced by us being able to really get hold of that cycle, even when it's more complicated. And the way to get hold of that is, and this is from another article from a community newsletter by Rebecca Jorgensen and Matt Angelstor, is to get looking at the motivations and the reactive moves, that we can get hold of it, it can reduce our confusion, it can help us stay with them more fully. So what we might have is, for example, the take charge withdrawer. This can confuse us because we think, well, if they're a withdrawer, surely they withdraw all the time. Well, actually, no, because it's what they do around intimacy and difficulties in the relationship. So you can have somebody who's really social. Yeah, they're the more outgoing and talkative of the two people, and they can still be with a withdrawer in the relationship. And what the issue is when it comes to personal stuff around intimacy and emotions, this is the partner who finds it difficult to open up. This is the one who just doesn't bring up the issues. And this is the one who's uncomfortable when they are brought up. Yeah. So that's the clue, is what happens around issues of intimacy and emotion, rather than how do they behave generally. And then what we have is, the thing that can really confuse us is when we have both of them attacking or both of them withdrawing. Yeah. And so let's look at when withdrawers are pursuing and when pursuers are withdrawing, because this is really, really helpful in doing this differentiation. So when withdrawers attack, it's usually in reaction or anticipation that their partner is going to be demanding or criticizing. Yeah, it isn't a fight for emotional connection. So the pursuers fight for emotional connection. A withdrawer will fight in a reaction or anticipation to criticism. Okay, it is about feeling overwhelmed. It is about feeling attacked. It is not a protest of disconnection. And they usually pursue for things like, you know, let's be close physically. Let's sit on the sofa together and watch television. It's for things like sex, time together. What they're not pursuing for is emotional connection, which is what the pursuer would be pursuing for. Yeah, so the withdrawer wants emotional safety because I will be close to you, but it doesn't mean I want to be intimate and kind of looking at the emotions. Yeah, so these things are really helpful when you are hearing about an argument that they've said has happened, because what you can start to do is see what it is that keeps each of them in that argument, and that will then help you discern what position each is in. So this is an example of an attack from Laurie Brubaker's book, and what they called, the couple called theirs, was the raging storm. Yeah, so the more panicked and desperate for connection Sophie becomes, the louder she gets. And Ella becomes explosive in self-defense just before storming out of the room, ready to fire back again when she senses more demands from Sophie that tell her that she's, you know, a disappointing partner. So in spite of it being an attack sequence, you can see within that Sophie is desperate for connection, she's pursuing, yet Ella is becoming explosive in self-defense as the withdrawer. And then the opposite is when you've got the pursuers shutting down, and they're usually shutting down because in essence, it's their best attempt to continue to fight for or preserve the relationship. For example, they might feel shame and, you know, feel the negativity of their view of self. There's something wrong with me. I'm too needy, so I better shut up. I'm too demanding, so it'd be better to say nothing. I don't have a right to get angry. They could also be quite frightened of the partner's defensive anger, so that shuts down their pursuing. And they might want to kind of not bother their partner and not trigger them to shut down even further. So they withhold their needs so that they don't lose their partner even further. And they usually withdraw because they actually want an answer. They don't withdraw to be away from the other, but they withdraw for the other to come to them. Do I matter to you? Will you come after me when I leave? Yeah. And they can withdraw because they feel incredibly alone. So similar, but more to do with loneliness. Will you come to me? Will you come after me? Will you reach for me? Or it could be that they're burned out and they're just giving up hope of ever reaching and connecting with their partner. And so what this withdrawn pursuer needs is emotional connection and comfort, yeah, which is not what the withdrawer is looking for when they withdraw. So we can have a withdraw couple, which in essence is often when the pursuer has got to a position of burning out. Yeah, no one is reaching for anyone. There's no risk, there's no dance. Yeah, they're both in self-protection mode, both decided that, you know, it's their flaws that are causing this. And basically the critical partner has gone silent. They can be really polite to each other, they can be quite cooperative with each other, but unless there's action, that love relationship is over. Yeah. And we also have what we were talking about before, the reactive cycle. The reactive cycle is when the pursuer's become burnt out and the withdrawer hasn't stayed withdrawn. What the withdrawer has done is shifted to reactive pursuit. And you will know this by things like they tell you, you know, they can be really clear, you know, the pursuer can, the person who previously took the pursuing position will say, you know, I used to kind of push and push and push, and it just didn't do any good, and I've just got exhausted and I've just stopped. And it's like, you know, it's up to him now. Yeah. And the other thing is that you will notice when they're talking about their current cycle, the kinds of things that the person who looks like the pursuer is actually pursuing for. So like we were just saying before, a reactive pursuer, so really a withdrawer, will typically pursue for physical closeness, doing activities together, rather than emotional connection. Yeah. And Jim Thomas has got a wonderful article in an ISEF newsletter again, on how to work with the reactive cycle and how to respond when the one partner is basically saying it's too late. That's the burnt out pursuer saying it. Yeah. So what he talks about is, first of all, you know, don't give up in you. Yeah. Assume there is a bond. They're in the room. Yeah. So assume there is a bond and kind of hang on with that. And that gives you your kind of attachment bond, but you're not going to be kind of sharing that in a warm, fluffy, you know, way. Oh, it's because you really care about each other. You need to keep that really muted, but just really have that assumption in you of a bond. You need to see the attachment dance. You need to kind of really know that it has moved from a yearning and searching to a despair. Yeah, you holding on to that and having that in awareness is just so important. You explore the withdrawer's experience. Yeah. So what is the panic that they're feeling? So we're talking here about the withdrawer's experience who's become a reactive pursuer. The panic that they experienced as their partner withdrew. You need to get to some feelings in that withdrawer to evoke some pull from the burnt out pursuer. And then what you do is you validate and resonate and explore with the burned out pursuer's experience, how it is right now in this current reactive cycle. Yeah, you need to be with them where they are now before they're going to make a shift. As that burned out pursuer gets angry at times, we see that as progress, yeah, because it's their protest re-emerging. And then what you do is you do what he calls the emotional dig. You really explore, well, what happened? And when did it happen? And what was it like to really kind of push and to try and reach him and to keep not being able to reach him? Yeah, so really going into the emotional depth of it. And treating the pursuer like a withdrawer, yeah, in the sense of needing to really come alongside the burned out pursuer, who's become now a withdrawer, who's needing that tender care and that gentle drawing out for it to be safe enough for them to be able to come forward. Yeah, I really recommend that article. I think it's a really lovely one for that very challenging occasion that we have when we're working with a burnt out pursuer. And then what we also have, of course, is complex cycles. And complex cycles is where one or both are fearfully avoidant, where the source of their security and love has also been the source of danger. And this will usually be from previous experiences that they're bringing into this relationship. But we can also see a link with the chaotic panic that occurs around attachment injuries and the challenge of healing attachment injuries when the person who they're reaching for love and tenderness and who can kind of really help resolve this pain is also the person who has caused the pain. Yeah, so a similar kind of link. And really this work is slow, this work is gentle. Yeah, and what you're doing is you're kind of really noticing any experiences that challenge the working models of negative view of self, negative view of other. Yeah, you're making a lot of just those small experiences that are new and different. you have to be really unambiguous and explicit, because in ambiguity, there is an awful lot of room to react and to feel insecure. So real clarity is needed. Crises are going to arise, and you just have to expect them and weather them. Like, that is the norm. And you need to validate the different defenses that are in place. You need to also paint a picture of what secure attachment looks like. This may be a really foreign place to them. You know, it's so difficult for you to imagine the possibility that he could actually be there for you. Just as you are expecting crises, you're expecting crises in the alliance as well. You're expecting there to be times when, you know, you've just done something that maybe was just not sensitive enough, or you just had no clue that the person was going to react the way they did. You need to constantly monitor and mend the alliance. And you need to more actively challenge any negative sense of self, like unworthiness. You need to normalize it within the context of their traumatic experiences and what is normal for people to respond as a way of coping and surviving them is, for example, making yourself unworthy rather than the other. You know, so there might be bits of psych ed and bits of kind of personally challenging the negative sense of self in there as well. Okay. So, wow. Okay. So that's the first half, and we've taken more than half of the time. Are you hanging in there okay? Is there anything specific that you want to ask at this point before we go into the whirlwind of the second half? Just unmute yourself if there's something you'd like to ask.
I am good, thank you. It's so far it's wonderful. I want to hear more of that.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, that's helpful, because obviously I'm kind of talking to myself at the moment, and I know there's a lot in there. So yeah.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things, Sandra. I think it's great, you know, having a lot of information, but the opportunity to just break it up and say something is also brilliant. I've just got a couple of comments on a couple of those slides. So when the withdrawer gets into a reactive state and counterattacks, I think there's a sense of they counterattack as a defense. So it's
yes.
a defensive measure against sort of inadequacy, disappointing the partner, but also that terrible thing for withdrawers that they don't know what to do to fix it.
Yes.
And then the other comment that just came up, it may or may not be relevant to what you meant, in Jim Thomas's responding to it's too late. Just a slight caveat, of course, we really want to get a sense of whether the frozen one or the one that's saying maybe I want to finish, or I do want to finish, or I don't know, I feel emotionally numb, I don't know whether I can find my emotion. Yeah. I do think we have to do a really objective, gentle exploration of whether they are saying I'm done,
yeah, or
whether, you know, there's room, if you like, for maneuver.
Absolutely. And it's a delicate area, because yes, sometimes people come and they're essentially coming to be able to be clear that this is the end.
Yeah.
And there's also people who are coming because it's like, this is totally unbearable as it is, and I cannot see it changing, but there's a tiny bit of me that would really like it to. And it is discerning that. And, you know, sometimes what you need to do is to go into more exploration of it and see if the person stepping out kind of gets hooked. So, you know, so I remember working with a couple where one person wanted out and was pretty clear, and the other one wanted it to work. And they just had 3 sessions where we explored their relationship, we explored the current cycle, we went underneath it a bit, we got into some nice soft areas. And what we found is the person who was saying, I think I'm out, it didn't touch them emotionally. Yeah, it's like, you know, it was one of the things that struck that person themselves. They came back after a session where we'd gone into some nice soft areas. They'd been able to hear each other and kind of respond to each other. And that person came back and said, you know, it doesn't really it doesn't draw me in. It doesn't draw me closer. It doesn't make me want the relationship anymore. So that was the thing that really helped it become really clear for both of them and for me. And then the third session was really just exploring splitting up. So sometimes, you know, in that exploration, and that what you'll find is the person really is out. But a lot of the time you will find that it's like, I am out unless something changes, and I just can hardly believe it could change. And so somebody's asked in the chat about the link for the article. It's on like slide 74, I think, you know, where the references are, because it was one of the key references. So you can find it there. Okay. Right, I'm going to go back now, I hope that's okay, to go through the different stages and to explore some more within that. And again, it's going to be a bit of a whirlwind, because I'm going to try and do that within the time scale that we've got. I may go on a little bit, I'm not sure, and I hope that most of you will be able to stay with me if I struggle to do it within that timing. So I'll go back and share, and thank you so much for your input. There we go. Okay. So thank you for staying with me here. Okay, so what we have is in stage 1, most of you will be familiar with this. We have 4 steps in the de-escalation of the negative cycle. We've got the alliance and assessment, the identification of the basic negative cycle and the attachment issues that are underneath it. You've then got exploring underneath that cycle, the emotions that are underneath each person's position, and being able to really share that with each other. And then you've got reframing the problem, teaming them up against this negative cycle and the emotions and attachment needs that are there. And in a sense, there's a linear bit to it, but also they actually kind of overlap quite a lot as well as they go. So let's have a little example. The pursuing wife. I am so angry. I have been so let down here. I've never felt so lonely. I want to show him that he can't do this to me. And the withdrawing husband, you know, with his growing understanding, because what we're doing is a de-escalation example here, is no matter what I do, I keep getting this message that I'm disappointing. I don't speak the language. I don't know how to learn. I know I run away. I don't know what else to do. And she says, I know I push him away, but I get so panicked. I can't find you. And so he's then, I guess I have developed the art of hiding. I didn't really think you were looking for me. Yeah, I think we've got stuck. I don't know what to do, so I hide. And then you feel more lonely and you up the ante and get mad, and we both get hurt. And you can hear that, you know, this kind of example will happen as they reflect on something that has happened maybe in the week. They've gone into their normal ways of behaving, and now they can see it. And they come back and they tell you about it. And they don't get hooked by it. They just start to see the different positions, and they have compassion for themselves and each other in it as well. Doesn't mean that they can solve it all the time, not get caught in it, but they have this kind of owning of my part in it, my hearing what's happening for the other person, that we get caught in this cycle together. Okay. And it's different again for the withdrawer and the pursuer. So for the withdrawer, you know, if you think about what was the underlying feelings that were happening for the withdrawer and pursuer, it's not surprising that their experiences of de-escalation are different. So for the withdrawer, it's relief. My partner isn't hostile because they just hate me, or it's just random aggression. It's actually a desperate response to me hiding. Yeah, they start to get, they're trying to get a response from me. They're not trying to destroy me. They want me. Wow. And for the pursuer, the relief is that the partner isn't indifferent or uncaring. You know, that withdrawal just looks like nothing. It looks like you don't care. They get that it's not that at all, but it's protecting themselves from what the pursuer does that is so overwhelming. And they can start to see their partner as less uncaring and more frightened. Yeah, and there is such a relief in that. Yeah. Now in stage 2, we're restructuring attachment. So those familiar with the steps will know these. Yeah, we're promoting identification with the disowned attachment emotions and needs, parts of self, and we're integrating those into interactions, i.e. enactments. We're promoting the acceptance of the partner's new experience and new way of being in the other partner. And then the ultimate piece is we want the person to express needs and wants and have a really new, big, corrective emotional experience. Can somebody switch off their sound so that we don't have that thing? I don't know what that was. Okay, so what we know is there are 3 change events. Yeah, so in stage 1, it's the de-escalation one. And in stage 2, it's withdrawer re-engagement and pursuer softening. Yeah, so the withdrawer re-engagement is where the person who was formerly withdrawn shares their attachment fears and needs from an engaged and assertive position. They're stepping into the relationship. They're asking for what they need to feel safe, to stay engaged with their partner. Yeah, so they start the whole process really with starting to engage with themselves, because they're blocked off from themselves, engage with themselves and then engaging with other. Yeah, if both of them are withdrawn, then you begin with the one who's more emotionally accessible. And that's basically because you know neither of them are feeling really safe, and you draw one in first and then the other one will follow. And blamer softening is when the previously critical partner, from a position of vulnerability, asks for attachment needs to be met by their newly accessible partner. Yeah, so they're asking for their, to matter. Yeah, can I know that I really matter to you? It's really different from. Sometimes it may even be the same kind of words that they used sometimes as a critical spouse, but it's said from a whole different place inside the self. And it's a real watershed experience that redefines the relationship. I mean, both of them do, but this one more than the other. And it's the most difficult task for therapists and the couple to do. It's going the wrong way again. So one of the things that might be confusing when you actually look at the literature is, isn't it obvious that the withdrawer goes first and then the pursuer? But why is it obvious? Yeah. So if you have a withdraw-pursue cycle, neither are going to feel safe if the pursuer goes first, because they're going to be expressing all these emotions and needs to the withdrawn partner. But if the partner isn't on the dance floor, so to speak, it's actually going to trigger more panic and more withdrawal in the withdrawer, because it isn't just anger and criticism that triggers the withdrawer to withdraw. It can be the pursuer's pain or their tears that actually make the withdrawn partner feel overwhelmed or criticized, and so they freeze. Yeah, so you need the withdrawer to be engaged and to be able to respond and to hear the pursuer. And then I've already covered the withdraw, you go with the most accessible one. But another thing that can be really confusing in the literature is I know I've defined the two things, but when do they actually start, and how broad or narrow is the defining process? And if you look in the books and the articles, it is really different, and that can be a bit confusing. So one thing we have is the withdrawer starts re-engaging and the pursuer starts softening even in stage 1. You've got that said in numerous places. And there's a reality to that, isn't there? You know, as you get underneath the cycle and you make the cycle obvious to them, they both are making shifts. You know, they're both starting to connect more with the therapy process, to be able to hear themselves and each other more. So, of course, there is a sense in which that is the withdrawer re-engaging and the pursuer starting to soften. So you've got that really broad definition. What you've then got is, in other literature, it looks like it's, well, the withdrawer re-engagement is the process that starts after de-escalation, all the way to the end of the withdrawer re-engagement change event. And then the pursuer softening starts then until the end of the pursuer softening. Yeah. So you'll see that as well. It won't be quite said like that, but when you read it, that's what you will kind of read. What you'll also read is that some pursuer softening is happening as the withdrawer re-engagement goes along, so that it isn't one and then the other, but they're working more alongside. And then in some of the research literature on the blamer softening and withdrawer re-engagement change events, you will find a much stricter definition, where what they've looked at is recordings of sessions from 10 minutes before the therapist's invitation for the one partner to do the reaching enactment, step 7, to 3 minutes after the therapist asking the receiving partner to respond to the reach. Yeah. So when you read different literature, it's important to kind of get a handle on what do they actually mean and how does that kind of change what I'm thinking about here. So just be aware of that. So what Sue Johnson is saying, which I would completely agree with from my practice, and I'm sure many of you will, is that the events are, you know, they're presented as separate and independent, sometimes for ease, you know, in a book where you're writing about how to do something, but actually they're interwoven and they're reciprocally determining. So as the critical spouse becomes less angry, the more withdrawn partner gets a little more involved, takes that more risk. As that involvement increases, the critical partner discloses more needs and desires. You know, as one person shows a bit more vulnerability, the other one feels able to show more vulnerability. As one takes a risk, the other is able to take a risk, and it moves forward in that way, each influencing the other. Okay, I'm going to try and do this quite briefly, but what we have is 5, 6, 7 explains the change events for withdrawer re-engagement and pursuer softening. That, you know, the one does 5, 6, 7, then the other one does 5, 6, 7. But we also have researchers who have looked into those processes in more detail for withdrawers and for pursuers. So in terms of withdrawal re-engagement, you don't really find this anywhere except Catherine Ream's doctoral dissertation, followed then by Nick Lee's doctoral dissertation, both on withdrawal re-engagement. And they did a presentation at the last EFT summit, and, you know, there's handouts from that, but nothing published. And then in terms of blamer softening, as it was called, we can go back to 2004 with this, with Jim Furrow and Brent Bradley. And their specific work, it was then updated in 2010, but that was only at an EFT summit. And again, there's a handout for that, and that wasn't published. So this is also some of the challenges when some of the stuff is out there but hasn't really been published. But in Laurie Brubaker's book, she does refer to this latter bit of blamer softening. So it's helpful there, but you won't otherwise get this except if you look at dissertations or summit articles. But it can be helpful to look at specific patterns for each of the events. And I'm going to do a bit of a squashed bit here. So what we have with Lee is that withdrawer re-engagement, what we have is the withdrawer kind of gets to some primary affect. And you work with them possibly disclosing it, getting into then the potential shame and fear, really heightening it, heightening being really important, and then enacting it. Yeah. Now the enactment has to be done at a really good pitch of risk. And if it isn't, you have to go round again. So what they found were both Catherine Ream and Nick Lee, is that in withdrawer re-engagement, because the withdrawer finds it hard to stay with emotion, will often get it and then they move away from it. So they found that you often need in withdrawer re-engagement a series of enactments that build to the step 7 reach. Yeah, so they found it in the people that they looked at that you could have literally 3 to 6 enactments, small ones that were done that gradually built the process up, getting it to enough of a kind of pitch that they were then going to do an ask from a place, a quite fearful place. And it's only when the emotion is really heightened and the person is in a really fearful place that they're really going to have a really good corrective emotional experience. So what they do is keep heightening it, get the support of the partner, do things that on each circle of enactment builds it up until they do a step 7 reach, and then they get the partner's response and the resolution from it. What they found, which is different to the literature, is when I'm talking about the literature, I'm talking here about Sue Johnson's and Laurie Brubaker's book, is that in those books, I think both of them indicate that the withdrawer re-engagement is a very powerful experience, even if the pursuer does not accept the reach. You'll find that, I mean, they don't make a lot of it, but it is there as a sentence. However, what Catherine Ream and Nick Lee both found is that when the pursuing partner's response wasn't supportive or validating in that process towards and at the step 7 reach, that the withdrawer seemed to shut down or exit. Yeah, and that when it worked successfully, the pursuing partner was also accessing their emotions in response to the withdrawer doing their work and touching on their vulnerabilities. And the idea is that the pursuing partner was kind of, in doing that, giving a message of safety and an invitation for the withdrawer to kind of come forward with their more primary emotions. So what they found was that it might actually be important to do some initial softening of the pursuing partner before getting the withdrawer to re-engage. And you can do that partly through, what's it like for you to hear your partner, touch into this fear and this fear of sharing it with you. Would you be able to hear it? What happens, for you in response to that? Yeah, so ways of bringing the pursuer with the experience in a soft and supportive way. So that's an interesting difference from the books to what Catherine and Nick found. And then what you have, the Bradley and Furrow one, which is the blame a softening event. If we have a look at that, we don't have that same issue around repeated enactments, because the pursuer is usually a lot more comfortable, if you like, being in emotion. What they actually often need doing is toning down a bit so that they can stay within a range of workability with it. Yeah, so it would be accessing the fears in the same way. It would be getting the partner on board. So in this case, it would be the withdrawer. So again, very similar thing. experiencing, imagining the reach. Yeah, can you imagine telling your partner this? Really processing that fear. Yeah, because this is one of the things that really heightens it and really helps you differentiate what's going on, is that you really go into what the fear is of reaching. And one of the things that they picked up on here that is different from the withdrawer is that often in processing the fears of reaching, they got to two different fears. And one was, for example, a fear that the other one would be there for them. Yeah. And the other was a fear of their own, which is a fear of not being worthy of the other one being there. Yeah. And there is a real need to differentiate between the two because they're different. Yeah. So if it's a fear of their own, of being worthy, you need to go into it deeper and deeper, you know, to be able to get hold of something that becomes then the fear of what they're going to ask for in this relationship. Then you do the actual blamer reaching. The withdrawer will usually then just automatically reach back with support. You'll process it with both of them. How was that experience? And then what they emphasize more than in Nick Lee's approach is more of a move 5 of the tango, which is really validating what they've done, really kind of going over it and sort of really kind of consolidating it and making sense of it. Yeah. So there are differences between the two, which I've just kind of said. And if you look at the research, what you find is that attachment avoidance, so this is the withdrawing bit, reduces significantly over the course of therapy and relationship satisfaction increases. This is in successful therapy. But attachment anxiety reduces only for couples that have achieved the pursuer softening event, and it happens after the blamer softening. So the thing that can be the most difficult in therapy is to get to the place where you've done the blamer softening. But actually, it's really important for ongoing change in the relationship after therapy as well. Yeah. So what you have is the avoidance, so the withdrawing reduces over time. Yeah. From the beginning of therapy through therapy. But what you have with the anxiety is that although in a sense they're doing some softening, their anxiety about the relationship does not fundamentally shift until the blamer softening event. And from then on, it makes a big shift. And any sessions that you do after that, it continues to reduce. Yeah. So that there's a real emphasis on actually getting through the whole process and getting through a blamer softening. Okay. And there are things that we can do that get in the way of being able to achieve that. We can lose our attachment lens. We can not go into emotion much. We can not get it right around those views of self and other. And a big one, which might be dead obvious, but was something that Bradley and Furrow found, is that lots of therapists didn't actually choreograph a softening reach. They didn't choreograph an actual request. So a softening did not actually happen. So that's one of the things you need to be aware of is finessing your ability to actually get people to do an actual reach. Okay. And then what you have in stage 3 is consolidation, as we know. What we have in stage 3 is we have an engaged withdrawer, a softened pursuer. They've earned relationship-specific secure attachment. And although that cycle is going to erupt occasionally, they will be able to turn to each other in times of difficulty. Okay, so I've whistle-stop toured that a little bit. You've got some slides that expand on it a little bit. But let's have just a few minutes now at the end where we can get your responses and any questions around that. So you can unmute and tell me how you're doing and if you've got a question from that. Okay, anything anybody wants to know? Because I imagine a bit of that last bit was new to most of you, because lots of people don't go to articles. Yep.
What I'll say is that I love your pacing when you're talking or when you're teaching about EFT. And I think EFT is ongoing. There's always things that you will stumble on. That's all I can say. You know, there's a lot to take in, and thank you very much for taking your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm hoping I broke it down enough at the same time as going through it at quite a pace. So yes, there's always more to learn, and some of it is like dead obvious. It's right in front of you. It's in the book. You know, it's like you can go back to the same chapter again and again and see something quite different. That's one of the wonderful things about therapy, is we'll never know it all.
Sandra, I have one thing to say.
Yeah.
One very profound thing.
Right.
Wow.
What's the wow about?
I just love the input from so many different sources. And it's just the different way you've looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
The different aspects of looking at the withdrawal and pursuer position, not just as, oh, this is how you cope.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I thought there's so much on it. There's no point, you know, I'll just give the basics to contextualize where I'm going, but there's no real point just telling you the same stuff that's already just there anyway. Let's sort of explore and question a bit more. So I'm glad that's really struck you.
And the thing that most stood out for me, and I know it's probably, everybody probably already knows it, but it's just that reminder that neither the pursuer nor the withdrawer really get the impact and the pain that position causes their partner, which is what we're trying to flush out in therapy, that they really get the impact of that position. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's like for me, that was one of those where I know that, but it was actually finding it and dwelling on it a little that made me know that, you know, took it to a whole different level inside me around the pain of that for each person, and how the other one just doesn't know, even though you expect them to. And actually the other part of that was the other piece about how each of them doesn't know their own pain and distress either. Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Can I ask a question, Sandra?
Yes.
Hi, it's I don't know how to put the question anyway, but first, thank you very much, because it's very helpful to know the different positions and how it is moving from one position to another. But I have a question, because we do the individual session to know about the attachment history. For how much I can use the info, because most of the time it's very prominent. This is coming from there and then. So how much I can use there and then, here and now, because it's just raise awareness. Why is this happening? How much I can use this information? Because if I use this too much, it will be always on the session. I don't know. It's I don't know.
Yeah. So it's like, how do I use, you know, when they have kind of learned this way of being as a common way of being in relationship distress because of childhood experiences, how much do I bring that into the here and now?
Yeah, it's always there. It's always, and how much I can use it and bring it in the room.
Okay, I will answer that, but I'll also 12:30, and I know some people will have to leave. I can be here for another 15 minutes because I know that I've just kind of gone through an awful lot of stuff, and I'm very happy to answer questions. So if people need to leave, I totally appreciate that. We'll keep videoing, and we'll have these questions on the YouTube video as well. So anyone who can stay and wants to, that's also great. Okay. So So the past, I mean, basically we're using it in service of the now. So, you know, in the individual session, I will be not only asking them about their past, but also asking them about how they see it influencing the way they are in relationships, to see how much they're making that link. And then when I'm back in couples, it's like I will bring it in sometimes as a way of making sense of things, and as a way of sometimes making sense of something that feels as though it's not just about this relationship. You know, I get how, you know, when she comes critical, you disappear. Yeah, you just withdraw because you get so panicky. And I know from the things that you've told me that this isn't just about this relationship. This is something that you learned an awful long time ago as a way of coping, yeah, when you got really distressed.
It's a defensive mechanism, so it's just been learned through life. So,
well, some things are learned in this relationship, and this relationship is the thing that's created it, and other things really kind of color the way they are in relationship. And when we do bring them in a gentle way in the service of this relationship, what it can do is help both of them go to a no blame place. I mean, when a partner hears that their partner disappears or becomes really critical, not just because of what they do, but because this person, for example, has got a traumatic
triggering for them something in the past.
It's a relief, and it often makes them more resilient in being able to be with that process more. And for them both to be in a team sort of with it when they see that it's not just about this relationship. It can actually make it easier to do the work. But you've got to be careful that you're not overusing it or whatever, that it's yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sandra.
Yes.
Hi, let me put the
Can you say your name? Because then
Ali.
Ali. Hi, Ali.
Hi. I've got a question about attraction. So often couples will come saying or certainly one will feel like they're just friends.
Yes.
And what you notice in how that changes over time in therapy.
Yeah. It's beautiful, isn't it? I mean, usually when they're saying we're just friends, if the withdrawers saying it, they'll often say it from a place of it being quite comfortable. We're friends. We're really good friends. Yeah. And if it's somebody who's the more anxious or pursuing in the relationship, they will often say, we're just friends. Nothing more. Yeah, you'll hear the difference, and that will help you tell you kind of what position they're in. But that shift is beautiful, isn't it? When you actually work with people and it's like, you know, I want my partner back again. And as you start to, you know, even sometimes I've had it in first sessions where, you know, they've been able to give an example of the cycle and you've been able to tuck under it a little bit and just make a bit of sense of that actually what they're both trying to do is reach for each other and it's going wrong. Even just that sometimes has the most profound shift in terms of the way they look at each other. Okay. You know, as they get that what they're trying to do is connect in their own way, you know, save this relationship in their own way. It is really lovely the way that opens up again, that yearning for connection, that attraction to each other.
Okay, so you sort of see that come out naturally as the therapy progresses.
Absolutely, as they start to feel safer again with each other, as they see something different in the attacking and withdrawing behavior.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question, Sandra?
Yes.
What's
your name?
Deborah.
Deborah. Hi, Deborah.
Hi. A really wonderful presentation. Thank you. Really, really, really rich. Do we know, given that the pursuer withdrawer dynamic is the most common, I think by far the most common, I'm just curious on what is the sort of the latest view on why would these opposites, if you like, be so attracted to one another when it causes so much pain?
Okay, so I think there's two things that I would say. One is that there is a kind of natural connection of the two. I mean, it would be really difficult if you had two people who really were very in the pursuer role, anxious all the time. Can you imagine that? And how would they get together and sustain a relationship if they were both very withdrawn? You know, if it was more of a fixed way of being in the world. So, you know, that they would be really challenging relationships to kind of hold on to. But really, they're relational positions, and when one is in one position, it promotes the other position. So, for example, you know, in one of my relationships, I was the withdrawer, and I would say that's my natural state. I'm really much more comfortable being able to be in the withdrawer position. Obviously, that's changed over time because, you know, I'm much more comfortable now walking into, you know, pain, emotion, and all sorts of things. But a kind of natural thing would be, you know, to give me space, give me time, give me, you know, a bit of a withdrawer's place. Whereas, you know, in my current relationship, I'm the pursuer because my partner's more withdrawn around looking at emotional stuff. Maybe that's also an evolution thing because I'm more comfortable with it. I push for it more. You know, that I've changed over time, but also my partner does it differently than my previous partner. So they are relational positions, and it tends to be that what happens is that as one kind of is more pushy, the other one's more withdrawn. So there's almost a naturalness to it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
And Sandra, I wonder also if there's an unconscious fit there as well, as in there's almost like I don't know, you could almost think of it as spiritual desire to, you know, to meet or encounter that person that will surface our buried pain.
Yeah, yes. And also soothe us in different ways. Yeah? So, you know, somebody who, and it sort of doesn't fit quite because when we're talking pursuer withdrawer, we're talking about emotional stuff and intimacy stuff. But if I think about it, you know, it's like, you might be surprised, but I have, you know, I'm a bit shy actually when I'm not in a role. You know, that sort of how you interact with people and start to make conversations with new people and that I find awkward. So I have, you know, always tended to find somebody who is more social than I am. So they are the opener and then I'll kind of follow in after them. And that's a really lovely way of kind of having a relationship. So we will often attract somebody who gives us something. So when we're talking about pursuer withdrawer, you know, often one of the things a withdrawer can offer is a sort of dampening, a sort of solidness and a sort of feeling of groundedness and steadiness. And what the pursuer person who takes that more energetic position, and I know it's sort of it's difficult because it's sort of no, they're not positions generally in life, and yet are they? And you know, so it's a bit of a grey area in some respects. But you know, a partner who's more steady and slow and whatever might be attracted to a partner who's got more sort of action and anxiety and social. So you've also got something around that being in the mix. That the way the other one will tend to be gives us a part that we don't have so much.
In fact, as you've been talking, I've also been thinking on the level of the nervous system. So if a withdrawer is more inclined to be more hypo-aroused and a pursuer more hyper-aroused, one might soothe the other because the nervous systems complement, sort of soothe one another.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think
somebody more of a working, you know, the working levels of action. You know, not too down, not too up. You know, let's have fun in this area together.
I think somebody earlier in the chat talked about that, about the sort of different polyvagal kind of, you know, stimulation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the comments that are over in the chat. You know, appreciating, you know, the work. Yeah, I did get, as I say, fairly obsessed
So, Sandra.
Yes.
Tony Atkinson. One
Hi,
of the things
Tony.
I often find, you know, I've often thought I haven't got this cycle right, and as I've
Yes.
worked with couples, I often find that actually in different situations they almost swap roles.
Yes.
That they can both withdraw, they can both pursue. It's almost their dance. I think probably these are couples who are actually relatively secure. They haven't pushed themselves into those extremes. And I think a lot of what you've talked about today is where relationships are very close to breaking down because they've got to those extremes. But is that true in your experience, that sometimes it's almost part of the game they play? They're sort of finding their way. And I think the situation you said where a different theme could come in one and would cause them to change. And I think that's been my experience, which has actually led me to some difficulty of sort of coming up with their cycle. It's almost the cycle changes from one session to another. Is that, am I muddled, or is this what happens?
Well, certainly the information is saying that the more secure the relationship is, then, you know, you're not going to get caught in the cycles. I mean, there's a logic to that, isn't there? And that therefore there is more flexibility and fluidity about pushing for something that matters to you, and therefore having, you know, whether it's a positive or a negative cycle around one of them pushing for something and the other one being more reticent about it. Yeah. So I don't think I've ever had a couple that I would have put in that position. And I don't mean they don't come. I mean, I just have never seen any that have been in such a secure place. I think the other part of it is what was really helpful for me was really crystallizing through looking at the research about the piece about when the withdrawer pursues, that, you know, sometimes what you can think is this is a different cycle. Well, actually, it kind of is a different cycle, but it's actually still a pursue-withdraw cycle. If the withdrawer is pursuing for physical closeness, sex, activities together, then it is still a pursue-withdraw cycle, but they're pursuing to be with and to feel safe, but they're not pursuing for emotional closeness. And I think, you know, I'd known that before, but again, it was really reading it in different ways from different places that really crystallized how it's not that is a total different one, which I think I'd kind of got the message before, you know, so there's this cycle for everything and then there's this cycle for sex. And I'd kind of thought, well, aren't they the same cycle, but just for different themes? Well, they're not the same cycle. One cycle is around a fight for emotional intimacy, and that will be the main cycle. And the other one is a fight for kind of like physical closeness, which is not a fight for emotional closeness. And it will therefore have a different reactivity in the other person. Yeah, because the pursuer won't be responding to it as a withdrawer. They'll be pursuing it as a pursuer receiving a request for closeness but not intimacy.
Would you say, Sandra, would you say this is driven by the fear of loss?
That's the one that the pursuer is coming from, a fear of loss.
So is because the withdrawer might be withdrawn because to protect self, yes, and also if he's become pursuer or angry or whatever, there will be some loss. And if he's pursued, then he maybe because he feels he lost the partner, so he's tried to pursue to bring them back. So it's the fear of loss, is he?
Well, it's the pursuer who fears the loss and who pursues for that. It's the withdrawer who fears, you know, being remade or not being acceptable and being rejected. So they're pushing for the safety of being alongside. You know, if we have sex, then it'll be all right. If we sit next to each other on the sofa and watch telly, it'll be all right. If I go and mend your bicycle because it's broken, then, you know, you'll feel all right with me. It's that kind of.
So would you say if he turned to be a pursuer, he started to feel the loss.
Yeah, so what you've got then is when the pursuer becomes burnt out, so goes to a withdrawing position, then what may happen is that the withdrawer goes into panic. And in the panic, the fear will be that they will, that they will lose the other one, be rejected, and therefore they will kind of come out fighting. But they'll still only understand it in terms of closeness and fixing. They won't understand it so much in terms of intimacy and emotional connection. That will take you keep working through the EFT process.
So can I just add in one thing for you, Tony, that I wonder that might really also add to Sandra's really in-depth answer, which is, I'm guessing inferred in maybe your question, if I answer your question, is what am I looking at? How do I assess what's going on? Is, who's the pursuer, who's the withdrawer? And so one of the concepts that might be occasionally relevant is to think about a disorganized attachment response, where that can lead to one individual not always pursuing or withdrawing, but you get a mixed response. So about all those things that Sandra said have been brilliant, because they really get into the nitty-gritty detail. But that might be helpful sometimes, just to, does it help me just to sort of get a handle and think, is this disorganized?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Sandra, can I ask you a question about?
Yeah, last one. Okay.
Yeah, when the cycle is going to the attack.
Yeah.
Does it come across as a domestic violence to themselves, to the couple themselves?
Well, it obviously can escalate into physical violence. And there is a really lovely article that was written last year and published by Helene Igwebuike and Jeff Schlottmacher. I'm not sure, but I can send out the reference. It's a really beautiful article around EFT and intimate partner violence, and they really discern the difference between what we can effectively work with or not. And it really looks at how, for example, either the pursuer or the withdrawer, or both, can become physically violent. And that for the pursuer, it can be that everything gets worked up so much and they're not being heard and they're feeling so desperate that they get really overwhelmed and they hit out, or chuck something. And for the withdrawer, it comes from a different place. It comes often from a place where everything's getting overwhelming and they can't get away, and they're in that kind of defensive bit and everything. And again, they hit out in a way of not being able to escape into withdrawal. And yet they have a really lovely way of exploring it in terms of each position. And I would really, really recommend it.
Please send me, because I am working with the attack couple. So it will help me if you can do it. Would you mind?
No, I will send
the references. I've put the reference in the chat. So you might be able to sort of Google it, or on Google Scholar, possibly. And
how can I access to the?
I'll email,
because I need it for today before I go to my session. Is that the guilt? Is that the guilt one?
There's also a lovely article by Jim Thomas on, actually how to work with people if this has been identified.
Yes.
So we might be able to, Sandra, if you like, I think I've got these. I can just send them to everybody if you like.
Okay, that would be helpful. I haven't got any more time today to do that, but yes. And I can send out
Sarah, if you have a time, I will be really appreciated. I can equip myself before I go to that therapy today. Because I want to support my client. It happened once, like not while they are with me.
Okay, can we not talk about it right now because I'm still recording? Okay.
I'm sorry. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, no, you're all right. It's just a reminder as we just finish. Okay, so hang on to that for a minute. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll send in my next email to everybody, I'll send a fuller list of references and I will include that one. But Sarah will get back to you about that one, hopefully today, if that's all right.
Yeah.
And if you can give me that Jim Thomas one, Sarah, that extra one. I know it, but if you've got the reference handy, that would be good. We send that round. I thank you so much for all your good words about all I've done, and thank you for it all in the chat box as well, and for your really, really good questions. I mean, that's just fabulous. My next session is in 4 weeks' time, and it's going to have less density. So we'll be able to talk more and explore more, but they're two really important things, and they're ones that I chose. We're going to look at the things that surely you've heard in virtually every supervision session you've ever done, slowing it down and slicing it thin. So I hope you will join me again in 4 weeks. So I'm going to stop recording now, okay?